Hey everybody, it's John Schumacher here with newwavehealthcare.com. And before we start, I'd just like to give you a quick reminder that we are a video podcast. So if you're listening to this on iTunes or Stitcher Radio, head over to newwavehealthcare.com to check out all of our video interviews that we have there. We have over 35 interviews of some of the biggest names in healthcare entrepreneurship. So head over, check it out if you like video like me. Also, we also link up all of the guests' resources and contact information. So if you want to get a hold of a guest that really inspired you during one of these interviews, go over there, check it out, newwavehealthcare.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our email list as we put out a curated list of awesome articles as well as the replay of each week's interview straight to your inbox. And we also give you a couple of free downloads and awesome content for free. So head on over there, check it out, newwavehealthcare.com. All right, let's get started with our interview today. So today my guest is Dr. Susan O'Malley, who is the owner and medical director at Sona's Med Spa, which is dedicated to helping women maintain their beauty without surgery. Now, Dr. O'Malley is also a published author and has a new book out that's entitled Another 48 Tips to Turn Try into Triumph. So she's done an amazing story, and I had the honor to speak with her the other day on the phone. And needless to say, I had goosebumps on my arms and I think all over myself after listening and hearing her inspiring story about how she's progressed all the way through her life from college dropout to ER doctor to now successful business owner in an area that she's passionate about, which is helping women maintain their beauty without the need for invasive procedures. So Dr. O'Malley's been kind enough to come on the show today to share a bit about her journey. So if you're an entrepreneur at any age and want to change directions, maybe you don't feel like you can, maybe you feel like you're stuck, this is going to be an inspiring and informative story for you to help get you going in that new direction. So Dr. O'Malley, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us today. Let's just start out by having you share a little bit about you personally, and then we'll jump into your story.
Sure thing. Thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here. So a little bit personally about me. So as you alluded to, I was a college dropout, which is probably the most unlikely person to become a doctor, especially an emergency room doctor. And you know, I left high school at I was 17. I was the youngest person in the class, and I had absolutely no clue, no direction, no goals, nothing. And went to college because that's what you were supposed to do. So I actually borrowed the money myself, and it was 1969, and college, if you can believe it, cost $3,000.
Wow!
You can't even get a meal plan now for $3,000. College was $3,000. So I borrowed the money from the bank. There was no federal aid program. There was none of that. I borrowed the money from the bank, and I went to college. And I left the first year with still no goal and no direction and no clue, but now I owed $3,000. So I was 18 years old, and it was pretty scary, the thought of owing $3,000 and not having any idea what I was going to do to pay it back. So I dropped out. And I became a secretary of all things. I had learned how to type my senior year of high school, one typing class. I made a career out of it for 11 years with one typing class. And I was a secretary in New York City for 11 years until I was 29 years old, when I finally decided, you know, it is really time to get myself together. And so I went back to college. Because I did have the 1 year. Yeah, I had the 1 year, so I went back to college at 29. And, you know, I was there with all the 19-year-olds and the 18-year-olds, and here I was, 29, and I have to tell you, I was loving it. And, you know, and as you say, you know, reinventing yourself at any age, because a lot of people at 29, a lot of people I knew were saying to me, well, isn't it hard? Isn't it harder to go back to college now at 29 years old? And you know what? It was actually easier for me because for the first time I had a goal. Right. So it was harder for me when I was 18 when I didn't have a goal. So I had a goal, and you know, and I thought I was going to be a nutritionist. And within maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months, I was beginning to realize this is just not the career for me.
Mm-hmm.
And now I was really devastated because, for goodness sake, I was 29 years old. I was in college, and still there was nothing. How could this be? I don't know if you've ever felt like you're the only person on the planet who doesn't have a purpose.
Yeah.
But, I'm sure a lot of people, understand that feeling. And at 29, 30 years old, that's how I was feeling. Like, how could it be that I'm the only person on the planet that doesn't have a passion and that doesn't have a purpose?
Mm.
And I set my sights a little bit higher, and I decided, well, you know what? I really love science. So I think I'm going to be a doctor. Who decides like this? I'm going to be a doctor. My sister, who was 9 years younger than I am, was going to be a doctor. She was studying to be a doctor. She said, why don't you be a doctor too? I said, okay.
So,
okay.
So did you just decided that at that point that you were going to take the plunge, and up to that point so let's back up a little bit. So you were 19 when you graduated high school, and you went out and you jumped into college because that's what you're supposed to do, right? And that's what we're all told what to do, is to take that next step and move forward just like everybody else. And then you took a typing class and jumped into that, and you worked for 10 years, you said, as a secretary?
10 years. 10 years. And it was very intimidating because when I was graduating from high school, I was in a private girls' Catholic high school, and these girls had big dreams. Everybody was going to be something, and I didn't know what I was going to be. And so, I really felt inadequate. And I was so lost. And I thought, well, maybe if I go to college for a year, I'll figure it out. And at the end of the year, I now owed $3,000, but I still hadn't figured it out.
Right.
So, because I really had a lot of skin in the game, $3,000 worth of skin, I dropped out. And I became a secretary with the one and only skill I had, typing.
Right, yeah.
11 years.
So what did that feel like? I mean, you mentioned a little bit that you just felt like you didn't have a passion at that point, and you certainly weren't into medicine at that point. I know this is a healthcare show.
I was still passing out at the sight of blood. No, I was not into medicine at all.
Yeah.
And how did it feel? That's a very interesting question, because for me, and secretaries that's a great profession, and I'm not putting anybody down, but for me it was demoralizing because it wasn't a profession that I picked. It was a profession that picked me because I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And so it wasn't my passion. It was just something I showed up to do day after day. And when you are in a job that isn't your passion and you start to make some money, you really get locked in, because now what?
Right.
Now what? Do you leave the apartment in New York City? Do you leave the money? Do you leave the lifestyle? I mean, I worked 9 to 5. I had my evenings to myself, my weekends to myself. So it became, you get locked in. You could get locked in, and I was starting to get locked in.
Right. The golden handcuffs. The golden handcuffs, they call them, right? Like you're making enough money to be fairly happy, but you're not necessarily fulfilled. And there's a difference, I think, there obviously between getting by and really feeling like soulfully fulfilled. So you did that for a while, and then you already kind of mentioned earlier that at 29 years old you said that's enough. I want to pursue something else. Yeah. And so what inspired you to take the jump into college then?
So what inspired me to take the jump into college was another failed relationship. Because I spent my 20s when I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I didn't think I was smart enough really to really accomplish anything. And also I thought I was too old. The day I turned 25 was one of the worst days of my life. I was over the hill. I was a quarter of a century. I didn't have a college education. I didn't have a husband. I didn't have children. I didn't have a house. I had nothing. So I thought, what we do to ourselves, really, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And but I really felt like I was too old, and so I was looking really for a husband. I was a secretary for 11 years. My goal was to find a husband, and one more failed relationship, and I just found myself with everything I owned in a U-Haul trailer back in the bed I was sleeping in as a child, and I realized I got to make some changes here
Right.
because nobody's coming to save me. I got to save myself.
Right.
And so I decided to go back to college.
Okay.
For the only passion, because you hear, do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And I really loved food. So I thought, okay, I'll make a career out of it. I'll be a nutritionist.
Right.
Until I realized that it wasn't my passion either.
Yeah. What made you realize that it wasn't your passion? You taken a couple classes and you just
I
didn't
was
like?
yeah, I was in the classes. I was in the classes with everybody, and I was finding the science really very intriguing, which was a big surprise to me, and I wasn't fulfilled. The rest of it just wasn't doing it for me,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was actually the love of science and realizing that I wasn't clicking with nutrition that made me set my sights a little bit higher. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought, well, okay, I'm going to do it. My sister said, oh, come and do it with me. We'll do it together. It'll be great, blah, 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 blah. And as quickly as I talked myself into it was as quickly as I talked myself right out of it, because that's when the doubt crept in.
Mm.
Talking about, I'm 30 years old, people start medical school when they're 22 years old, what if I can't do the work, what if I'm too old, what if I'm this, what if I'm that, and it's interesting because I ask people to think, what is the best advice you ever got? Who gave you the best advice of your life? Because for me it was my mother. Because she listened to all of this cracking. I had to be cracking for weeks. Oh, I really want to do it, but I think I'm too old, but I don't know, but what if this and what if that? And finally, one day she looked at me and she said, Susan, one day you'll be 50 years old. You'll either be a doctor or you won't, but you'll still be 50. That's
Mm.
your choice.
Right.
And like that, all the clutter fell away, and I knew I had to do it.
Right. So
I had to do it.
so at that point you were still in school, but you had given up the nutrition, and then did you jump right into med school?
I did. I jumped right into all the pre-med courses, and I actually did it with my sister, my younger sister, and I moved out to LA because that's where she was living at the time, and we went to college together, and graduated, and she got into medical school, and I didn't.
Oh no.
Oh, yes. And this was not a happy day, I'll tell you. This was not a happy day because this was something I never planned on. In my wildest dreams, I never imagined that I wouldn't get accepted, but I didn't. And so I had to go through the application process all over again because I wanted it so badly, and I wasn't gonna give up. So because you say, oh, I applied to medical school again. Applying to medical school is a year-long process. It's a brutal process. I mean, now it's all done online, but at the time it was filling out applications, it was writing essays, everything was done by hand, and it really was a very time-consuming and emotionally consuming process. And I did it again, and the second time around, well, here's where the story really gets juicy, because the second time around, I had been out of school for a year, and my sister moved back to New York because that's where she got accepted to school, and I was still living in LA, and I started dating this guy, and there was an unexpected pregnancy. Let's just say everybody was very surprised.
Wow.
And yeah, and so at that time I was 35 years old, and now I was pregnant. I didn't have a husband because we had no intention of getting married. I mean, he wasn't the right one. Didn't have a husband, didn't have a job, didn't have health insurance, and was still applying to medical schools all around the country. So, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So, yeah, jump in at any time, John, unless you want me
Right.
to just keep on going.
No, I'm intrigued. I mean, listening to your story, and like you say, it's starting to get very interesting here.
It's
That here you
starting to get
are.
even juicier.
35 you said?
35. I was
35,
35.
pregnant,
35.
having all of these personal challenges in your
Yeah.
life, and then here you are still pushing through to get to med school.
Still pushing through to get to med school. And I realized that if I was going to accomplish everything, I was not going to accomplish it by myself. And that's a big lesson that I try and tell women in my book, as well as in my non-surgical practice. We all need help. Nobody gets to the top by themselves. So I moved back to New York because it was going to be the first grandchild. Everybody was very excited, and I moved back to New York again, back in with my parents. And the phone call came at 5 o'clock on a Friday evening. 3 weeks before school started, saying a spot opened up. Did I still want it?
Wow.
I was 6 months pregnant. I had no idea how I was going to do it, but I knew I wasn't letting it go. 3 weeks later, I showed up and got in step with everybody else.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So then at that point, you're 35. You got in. You're excited, but gotta be nervous and scared. But you're still, as has been the thread throughout your whole life, you've been willing to change directions. You've been willing to jump into it.
Yep.
And I think that's what a lot of people get stuck, is that their minds tell them that they can't, or they don't know enough, or they're just not ready for that, and so they stop. And so they stop, and they never try.
People will fool themselves. Well, listen to that chatter. It's not the right time, and we don't have enough money, and I'm not smart enough, and I'm not this, and I'm not that. And you know what? It's never going to be the right time, and you're never going to have enough money, and you're never going to know everything there is to know. And if you feel that you really want to do it, then now is your time. Then you just have to do it. Because if you wait for the stars to line up, if I waited for the stars to line up, I would have never gone to medical school.
Right. Yeah, they never line up. So
they never line up.
When do they line up? They never do. So
they never line up. Yeah.
So at that point, you're pregnant. You have a child then while you're in med school.
So I delivered the baby on Christmas vacation of my first year. Wow. I missed 2 days of school, and got back in January and sat down for final exams for that first semester. It was a wild ride, I'll tell you. And it was a blur at that point, because I was going home to a crying infant, and everybody else was going home to form study groups and figure out, difficult concepts in the classroom. So I didn't have that luxury to, because medical school is made up of 115 to 120 people who are used to being at the top of their class. Everybody got to medical school from being at the top of their class. I was no exception. I was at the top of my class. But now 115 people can't all be at the top. Somebody has to be at the bottom. And when you have 115 overachievers, nobody's going to admit to you that they're the one who doesn't know what's going on. So I'd be sitting in the classroom with all these younger people, and concepts would be flying at me, and I knew if I didn't get just the concept sitting in the classroom, that it was gonna be lost to me, and I was going to really get behind. So I would sit in the back of the room, and I was always raising my hand. Excuse me, can you go over that again? Excuse me, can you go over that again? Because I had to be on my soul in front of the whole class and say, okay, I don't know it. I don't know it. I'm the stupid one, but I don't know it. Whereas other people were going home at night in their own secure little study group and figuring it out. Yeah. I was going home at night to a crying baby. I didn't have the time to figure it out. And that's another really important lesson, because you need to be willing to be embarrassed. Otherwise, you're never going to make it. You're just going to get stuck right where you are. Let people know, hey, I don't know it. Right. Because I learned this concept from a physics teacher in my undergraduate work. because I was feeling, oh my goodness, I must be the stupidest person in the world. I don't understand what any of this physics stuff is. And he said to me, Susan, if you don't understand it, I can guarantee you that 50% of the people in the class don't understand it either.
Right.
But nobody's going to be the first one to raise their hand and say, I don't understand it.
Wow, yeah. Dare to be imperfect, right? I mean, that's what
Dare to be imperfect. Dare to let the world see that you're imperfect.
Right, exactly. I mean, certainly when we do these shows, they're not perfect. These are casual hangouts that we have with people. And you just have to be okay putting yourself out there and accepting criticism and accepting whatever people might say and consider it seriously, but don't take it personally. You know, like you should treat it seriously, but don't take it personally and keep it forward. So that's really, I mean, that has to be such a difficult situation for you. I mean, you have a young child crying, keeping you up at night. You have to study for medical school. You're going through all these things, but somehow you made it through.
It was exhausting. Yeah, it was exhausting. Exhausting? It was exhausting. Yeah. And people will ask me, well, how did you make it through? I made it through one day at a time.
Right.
Sometimes I made it through 1 hour at a time. Because if I would have looked at graduation day on the first day that I started, it would have been too overwhelming. I could have never done it.
Yeah.
But all I knew, I only had to get through that day. That's all I had to get through was that day, every day.
And just to take it one step at a time. That's
one step at a time.
Anything that we're doing that's, I mean, it seems like a mountain is just to take one step at a time.
That's
all it is what's the next step? What's the next step? What's the next step?
That's exactly right. So, you know, there's that saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Right.
That's how I got through medical school. One chunk at a time. Sometimes it was 1 hour at a time, but it was just a little bit by a little bit by a little bit. And one day you look at where you are and you can look back and see how far you've come. Right. And it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, one step at a time. And the power of staying present. Stay present and take one step at a time when the mountain is so big. So
that's right.
Yeah. So you did graduate from medical school, you got out, and then you were talking to me that did you jump into the ER right away, or what was the next step for you?
Well, when you get out, you have to do a year of medicine, which I did, and then I had a year in between because I didn't get picked right away, and I initially thought I wanted to be a radiologist, but you know, thank goodness that I didn't get picked to be a radiologist because it wouldn't have been the career for me because I was picking it really for the wrong reason. So I settled on, I say settled, it's not settled, I decided on a career in the emergency room, which for me worked out very well because I saw a little bit of everything and I knew when I was going to be at work and I knew when I was going to be at home because my son was now 5 years old. And I was still a single mom, and so I needed to have a schedule so that I knew when I needed someone to watch him. I knew when I was going to be home. I knew when I was home, no one was going to be calling me up saying, oh, we need this and we need that. I knew it was my time. So that was a big part of why I picked a career in emergency medicine. Right. And it turned out that I loved it. I absolutely loved it for a long, long time.
Right. So you found you feel like you found a passion, you were excited about it, loved your job, it fit with your lifestyle as far as about having a small child, you could set parameters around your time a little bit. And then as you went along with it, and you mentioned this on the phone, you were an ER doctor for almost 10 years, you said?
Oh, just about, a little bit less, yeah.
And then
training and everything else.
And then you mentioned again at another point that it's sort of, you kind of lost that luster for it. Can you take us to that moment where you've had a successful career as an ER doctor, but you hit a point where you just said, I don't know if this is my calling. Can you take us there?
Sure. And you know, at that time I was, I think, turning 50, and that is a really scary time to start questioning. Yeah. Do I want to do this? Do I still want to do this? And, you know, I was so tired. You know, I used to tell people I was raising my son by telephone. I was so tired. I was working around the clock, working midnight to 8, working 4 o'clock until midnight, and it was really exhausting. And so I knew that I wanted to do something else, but I didn't know what that was. And so I started asking family and friends, what do I want to do? Don't know, putting out feelers, and because I knew I wanted to be of service, but I didn't know how.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew I wanted to do my own thing at this point, but I don't have any entrepreneurs in my family. There was no one in my family that owned a business. I have to tell you, when I was a little girl, I didn't know that you could own a business.
Wow.
I thought people worked for a company, but I never realized that at the end of the chain, somebody owned the company because there were no entrepreneurs in my family. Nobody owned a business. This was totally foreign to me. So the thought at 50 years old that I would be stepping out into an entirely different field from where I was, plus being an entrepreneur, which, as everybody knows, comes with its own set of headaches and anxiety, was exciting and anxiety-provoking at the same time. But I knew that I had to do it. It had reached a point, I actually even had left the emergency room and I went to a clinic for 1 year because I was so exhausted. And I thought, well, maybe I could, be happy working in the clinic, and sleep in my own bed at night and have my weekends off. And I thought I could do it. And
Right.
I couldn't do it.
Right.
I couldn't do it. I was miserable. So that's when I knew that I really did have to do my own thing. And it's interesting how I made that decision too, because it's always, when you look back, things that you looked at the time that were a tragedy or so, a hurdle or something, really did move you and sometimes catapult you to the next level.
Yep.
But I had my 1 year review with my medical director in the clinic, and I had really, I felt, gone above and beyond in treating patients and doing a lot of different things and being a team member and all of that. And in the review, he said I was doing okay. What? Okay. No one in my life has ever said to me in a review, "Oh, you're doing okay." Okay. This is just, I thought, no, this is not the place for me.
Okay.
And the word okay set me free because I realized right then, no, I am not okay. I am many things, but I am not okay. And I went home and sat down with the pen and the paper and how much money do I have and who can give me more money and how can I do this and how can I do that and what can I cut from this expense and that expense. And 2 days later I went in and I just said, you know what, this just isn't working.
Wow. So at that point you'd left your job, right? I mean, you totally
at that point I left the job.
And did you know that what you wanted to do yet before you took the plunge? Did you have the idea for the business?
I had an inkling of what I wanted to do, but I still didn't even know what it looked like, or exactly, all the ins and the outs. And but I did have an idea that I wanted to be of service to women, and that I would like to help women stay beautiful. And at this point, I'm 50 years old myself. I'm thinking, gee, I'd love somebody to help me stay beautiful. So why don't I help other women?
Right.
And so I rented a space. I found a space, and the guy made a deal with me. He wanted a 5-year lease. I knew I couldn't sign a 5-year lease. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing. But he made a deal with me. If I renovated the place myself, he would give me the space for a year. So I thought, you know what? I can do this for a year, and at the end of the year, I'll know if it's going to work or it's not going to work. And so I took the space. I renovated it myself. I mean, I was up on the ladder painting the walls and doing all this stuff. And I put a $75 ad in the newspaper, and I sat at the reception desk and I waited for the phone to ring. And that is how I started my business.
And how did that go?
I don't recommend it.
Did you have a mentor or anybody to help you? Like, because you never owned your own business. You've done a lot of really amazing things as a doctor and everything, but you never owned your own business and how to do marketing and PR and dealing with all the administrative work of running a business. I mean, did you have anybody to help you, or you just jumped in?
I just jumped in. Yeah. My husband, who at the time was my new boyfriend, had a consulting company. So, he could give me a little bit of business advice, but it was really an entirely different industry. And, I didn't even know what marketing was.
Yeah.
I didn't know that advertising and marketing were two different things. I had no idea. I thought I'd put this $75 ad in the newspaper, and women were going to be so excited that they were going to show up, because we never advertised in the emergency room and people just showed up. We didn't even lock the door and people showed up. So I just really thought women were going to show up. What a surprise.
Right, right. So what did that feel like then when the phones weren't ringing and people weren't coming in, and what was that like for you?
Well, it was a double whammy, really, because first of all, it was very disheartening. As the business owner, it was very disheartening, and also a rude awakening. But it was a double whammy for me because I was right back to being a secretary where I was before I was even an emergency room doctor. Mm-hmm. So all those feelings were tied into the feelings of failure. And, I realized that I really needed to make big changes here, because just because I was 2 doors down from a hair salon and had a $75 ad in the newspaper, it didn't mean anything. No. And I started sending out newsletters. I think I had 11 people on the list. I had nothing. And I started doing speaking. I would, got a room at the library, and I gave a couple of talks, and little by little, it just it started to pick up, because for the cosmetic industry, it was really very difficult, because a lot of businesses will grow themselves by word of mouth. The cosmetic industry doesn't grow itself by word of mouth, because ladies keep everything a big secret.
True. Yeah.
So nobody is going to tell her friend, oh, I got this done and I got that done. So it was like starting a new business every day.
Wow. So at what point could you give us a few tips? I mean, you obviously have created a successful business now, but I mean, was it just simply getting out there and networking, or what were what's one or two tips you could give us for somebody who is starting a new business that helped you be successful?
The networking is really important. Mm-hmm. I didn't even realize, but when I first opened the business, and my finances were so tight, somebody had said, well, you should join the Chamber of Commerce. And I looked into that, in that town, and it was $265. And sadly, I will tell you that I could not justify spending $265 to join the Chamber of Commerce. That's how bad it was. Mm-hmm. So, but I would tell people, absolutely, you have to network. You can't do it on your own. You have to network. And if you can, and this is another thing, somebody once told me, if you're not a marketer, you're not in business. Because when people ask, what do? Everyone's inclination to say, well, I do this, I do that, I'm a masseuse, I'm an esthetician, I'm a this, I'm a that. If you're not a marketer, you're not in business.
Right. Yep.
So you really have to figure out what it's going to be for you, because it's not up to your people to remember that you're in business. It's up to you to remind them that you're in business. Yep. So for me, it was newsletters that started out, that I would type on a computer and print out and put in an envelope and send out, because I didn't even have internet. This is how bad it was. Yeah. So, but it really is pressing the flesh. And if you can put a little talk together about whatever it is that is your expertise, then go stand up someplace, even if you only have 10 people. The first time I ever gave a talk, my throat was so dry. I was so scared to death. I think I went through 2 bottles of water. But, you had to do it. You have to do it. If you're going to be successful, you have to do whatever it takes to do that. Yep. It's really important to you.
Absolutely. And giving talks in your local community, we've touched on that before here on the show, is one of the best ways to meet your local community and to be seen as an expert in your niche, and you could really call several civic organizations in your communities to ask them, because they're always looking for speakers, right? Like,
Yes.
you know, would you be willing to have me give a talk for free? You know, and then you can maybe bring a little guide or make a little resource guide for people, bring it to the talk, and then say, okay, at the end, you know, I'd love to give this free resource guide for anybody who's interested. I'll just exchange it for a business card, and there,
Yep.
and then you have some leads, and people are interested.
And it works.
In what you're doing.
And it works.
Absolutely.
And you really can build a business.
Right. Right.
You
Absolutely. Know? So, well, so as we wrap it up, kind of wrapping your story up, bring us to today now. So, I mean, where are you guys at today? I mean, you obviously struggled a lot along the journey, and take us to today for a few moments and kind of share some of your biggest successes. Why don't we just say what have been your biggest successes throughout this entire process?
Well, a couple of big successes. First of all, my business, Sonus Med Spa, is unrecognizable from where I started with a $75 in the news. Just unrecognizable. And I think one of my biggest successes for me personally is I found my voice.
Okay.
Because, you know, until you find your voice, whether it's within your industry or within yourself, or, you know, because until I found my voice, my business wasn't, I don't even know how to put this, but people can take advantage of you. People can, you can give your business away when you don't have that that feeling of worth and value. That, you know, no, my business, I deserve $400 for this treatment. I deserve, you know, whatever it is. And until you find your voice within yourself, then you can't really move your business forward. For me, you see, that was an issue for me, because coming from the emergency room, I gave everything away.
Yep.
I gave you my time, I gave you my brains, I gave you my sympathy. As you were leaving, I was filling up a bag with supplies. Here, you're going to need this when you go home. I gave it all away. So the first time I had to say as an entrepreneur, that'll be $150, I thought the sky was going to fall in.
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate to that. You know, the first time I started having people pay me to be a consultant for them, it was just like, at first I was just giving too much away, give, and you almost feel guilty and bad. You're like, this person's my friend, and I'm going to charge them money.
That's right. And until you see the value in what you have, you don't feel comfortable charging for it. And it took me a long, long time to see the value in what, in not only in what I do, but in who I am and in what I bring to you. Because, quite honestly, I mean, I do non-surgical procedures. You could train a chimpanzee to put Botox in your face, but I do much more than that for you.
Right.
Until you recognize that, you know. So for me, that was a big success for me personally.
Perfect. Yeah. So, awesome. Well, you know, Dr. O'Malley, as we wrap things up, let's just, if you would, because this has been an inspiring story for anybody who's maybe at a crossroads in their lives. They haven't found their passion. They're not quite, they know that this isn't quite what they want to do with their lives, but they're scared to jump in that direction. They're scared because, one, of the unknown, and two, they just don't feel they can do it. As we wrap things up, can you just share with our audience one piece of advice you would give somebody who's, let's say, in their 50s, like you were, or whatever age, and is ready to make a U-turn in their lives, but is scared to do it?
So I would say a couple of things. Ask for help, because nobody gets anything done by themselves. Be willing to make mistakes. That's really important. You're never going to get it right, especially the first time, the second time, the 10th time. Doesn't matter. So you have to be willing to make mistakes. You have to be willing to ask people to help you out. You know, when I was at 50 years old, when I was starting the med spa business, I had reached a point where I ran out of money. And I had to go to my boyfriend and my mother and ask for loans. And I was humiliated. I was 50 years old. I have a child at home. I have a house. I have a mortgage. I have this business, and I can't pay my bills. But I had a choice. Was I going to ask for the help? I'm asking for financial help is really humiliating. Was I going to ask for the help, or was I going to fold it and go back to the emergency room?
Right.
And if you want to do it, if it's that important to you, then you have to develop a take no prisoners attitude, whatever it takes. But you have to be smart about it. I mean, you can't mortgage the house. But, you know, there are people that want to help you. I mean, think about it. We all want to help other people, but yet nobody wants to ask for help.
Right.
So, you know, ask for help, be willing to make mistakes, and, you know, be organized. Because being organized will really keep you on track. And celebrate small things. Because here's another thing that I would do, and I have finally, thank goodness, stopped myself. I would accomplish a goal in business, and it was something that I wanted to do. So if I wanted to get to this financial level, or I wanted to get to learn how to do this procedure, or whatever it was, and I would get to do it, and I was finally get to do it, and without even celebrating how great that was, I was on to the next thing.
Yep.
I was on to the next thing. Oh, well, it was great that I hit 50,000, but oh, if I could only hit 75. Stop and celebrate what you did and what you got done. And help other people.
That's great advice. Yeah, I think they call that the hedonic treadmill. I think where it's just there's never enough, right? We're always pursuing more, more. We're never satisfied, and they always say a satisfied need no longer motivates. So it's like I think it's human nature, but you're right. Take the time to smell the roses.
Take the time to celebrate. Not to say that you shouldn't keep on going and want to get to the next level. Just take the minute and celebrate where you are.
Right, exactly. All right, well, Dr. O'Malley, thank you so much for coming on the show today, sharing your inspiring story with all of our viewers. Let's just have you wrap things up by just sharing where our viewers can find out more about you and what you're up to, and then we'll say goodbye.
Sure thing. So I actually have two websites. The first is my Sonus Med Spa website, which is dedicated to the non-surgical procedures, as you know, and that's www.sonusmedspa.com, S-O-N-A-S. And Sonus is the Gaelic word for happiness, and I'm a good Irish girl, so it was a perfect name for me. There is a 20-page special report, How to Stay Younger Without Surgery. If anyone's interested in that, they can download that. I am also, actually within the past just couple of months, starting on a new venture, which we touched on, Try to Triumph. And I have written a tips booklet, 48 tips to turn try into triumph. It's great information for anyone in transition, for new graduates, for women that are, you know, anyone who wants to take themselves to the next level. It's a common sense, no nonsense approach. Unless you haven't figured it out, I'm not big into manifesting. I'm bigger into rolling your sleeves up and getting the job done. So that's www.trytotriumph.com, and again, free for download. So, John, thank you so very much for having me. I really appreciate it. I had a blast, and I hope that I was a help and that you enjoyed yourself too.
I very much did. Thank you so much, Dr. O'Malley, for sharing your inspiring story, and I hope all of you guys enjoyed that as well. Certainly an inspiration and a lesson that it's not too late to find your passion. You know, don't be afraid to make mistakes, to take a risk in your life, because really in life, if you're not pursuing your passion, what are you doing? You know, because really, even if you fail in your passion, which you really, it's hard to say that you can, but even if you fail, there's no other better way to live. So, well noted, and it was a very inspiring discussion today. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you are listening to this on iTunes or Stitcher Radio, and you want to watch the video of this or get the resources that Dr. O'Malley had mentioned, her book and her website, go over to newwavehealthcare.com and simply type in to the search bar Dr. Susan, and her show notes page will pop right up. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed that. I'll see you on the next one.